Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be joined today by Kelsey Dineen, the director at Midland Trust Company. You know me, I'm Dr. Daniel Shin. I'm a urologic surgeon and real estate investor. I blog as a Darwinian doctor and also have founded Serious Real Estate to provide real estate investment opportunities for high-income professionals. And one of the things that I became aware of during this journey is that you can use retirement funds to invest into real estate. And that's why Kelsey is here today. Good morning, Kelsey. Can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah. Hi. Good morning, Daniel. Yes. So I am Kelsey Dineen. I am a director here at Midland Trust. We're actually a division of Equity Trust. If you've ever heard of Equity Trust, it's one of the largest self-directed IRA custodians in the country. We'll get into that later. But basically, I've been in the industry for about 15 years now. My primary goal is basically to work with investors and fund managers like yourself, and like you said, help educate them on how they can use retirement funds to diversify into private offerings like real estate.
Excellent. And I think it's a really common situation that I'll talk to an
Mhm,
investor and we'll talk a little bit about the deal and then we'll talk
mhm,
about the minimum investment. And usually it's going to be something like $50,000. And I actually had an investor who asked me the question, who has $50,000 just lying around? And I think it's a common situation where
mhm.
most people, if they have that amount of capital, they'll have it invested. And either it'll be in their retirement accounts or it'll be in a taxable brokerage. Um, so the retirement accounts are actually a huge source of wealth that people just think is untouchable. So how does your company kind of solve this problem?
Sure. So you could think of equity trust. So again, I'm with Midland, which is the institutional division. And what we specialize in is providing a custody service. So the way I compare us, just to give like an apples to apples comparison, is think about your retirement account right now. It's probably held somewhere at a Charles Schwab, a Fidelity, a Vanguard. Those are called broker dealers. So basically, business wise, their business is set up to onboard your retirement funds, look at your particular profile, give you investment advice. So they'll say, okay, what's your risk? They'll usually have you answer a questionnaire. They'll assign you a certain risk profile and they'll say, okay, based on, how you've answered these questions, we recommend we're selling these various products. So they usually have a very limited menu of products that they'll offer. It's stocks, bonds, mutual funds, things that are publicly traded. That's what most people think of when they think of retirement account. They think the stock market, right? So what we've done is we've basically filled a void in the market for people who need a niche where they go, okay, well, I'm happy with putting some of my retirement funds in publicly traded items like stocks and bonds, but we've got these great investment opportunities. Daniel, they're talking to people like you and they're finding these great private investment offerings and they want to be able to put retirement funds into those. So our company is what you call self-directed IRA custodian. We will hold custody of private assets. So things that are not publicly traded. So you can think of us almost like a complement to a broker dealer like a Schwab or Fidelity. So you could do traditional stocks and bonds there. And then you could have a retirement account here at Equity Trust doing, let's say, private equity, venture capital, private lending, all sorts of things that are not publicly traded. And it's still a retirement account. It's still tax sheltered. So basically, we fill that void for holding custody of private assets.
Okay, excellent. So using a self-directed IRA, someone is able
Mhm,
to finally invest into these things that is separate
mhm,
from the stock market and separate from index funds and all of that. I think it is a common situation where people are kind of unsatisfied with their investment opportunities in retirement accounts. And
mhm,
a lot of it is because they might not like the ETFs or the mutual funds that are available. But
mhm.
I think more commonly when I talk to investors, it's going to be that they want to have access to capital that they just have sitting around and theoretically wouldn't be able to touch for 30 years until they retire and direct, but in this way they can actually really have a lot more control over it.
Absolutely. And the only thing I would add to that is it's not just like you said, who has 50,000 sitting around, right? That 50,000, most high net worth individuals have significant amounts of their wealth, of their household wealth in retirement accounts. And liquidity is usually not an issue. So when we're talking about, let's say you have a real estate deal where there's a horizon of time, 5 years or more, where there might be a lockup period where you say, once you're in, that money is going to be invested in this project for X number of years. For a retirement account investor, that's not a big deal because they can't touch that money anyway until retirement age, which is usually 59 and a half. So for most retirement accounts, the liquidity lockups or anything of that nature, not an issue whatsoever because they're incentivized by the government not to touch it, which leads to the second point. If you don't touch it and you let it compound and grow in your retirement account, it's tax sheltered. So you get this benefit basically of tapping that source of cash that you already have. You get the tax sheltered nature, and you get the nature of basically letting it compound and grow over time. So these are all kind of favorable items that when you look at retirement accounts, that's why they're generally very well suited to investments like the ones you're involved with.
Perfect. Okay,
Mhm.
and if we can get just fairly basic for a moment and talk about the
Mhm.
terminology, we've mentioned self-directed IRA. So is that going
Mhm.
to be the vehicle by which people can convert over their retirement accounts,
Mhm.
no matter what they're coming from? Or can you help us understand this a little bit more?
Sure. So self-directed IRA is more of a description, right? So there is no, if you go out to the IRS website and you're looking at the various types of IRA accounts that are offered, there really is no self-directed IRA. So all the IRAs that we open up here, they are all self-directed. A traditional IRA, a Roth IRA, a SEP IRA, those are specific types of IRAs. And it's just like an IRA at Schwab or Fidelity. So same idea. If you have a traditional IRA or a SEP IRA at Schwab, Fidelity, Vanguard, you're opening up maybe the exact same type of IRA here, a traditional, a Roth, a SEP, et cetera. Self-directed more describes the custodian and what they allow you to do with the funds. So our self-directed here at Equity Trust, it's not only that you are choosing your own investment options. So there's no fiduciary relationship. I'm not selling or endorsing a product. I'm not telling you what to invest in. I'm saying you as the retirement account holder are self-directing. You are choosing the investments. Or maybe you have an advisor behind you, like an RIA or someone who's giving you investment advice about a particular asset. You're basically sourcing and doing your own due diligence. So that's part of the self-directed definition. The other part of that is that you have the freedom to place that money, your retirement funds, in anything legally allowable. So if you find a great real estate fund or real estate syndication or offering that you wish to place your retirement funds into, we will allow it because we are a self-directed IRA custodian. So it's kind of a two-part definition. And the reason I highlight that is because I've spoken with many investors who have, let's say, an IRA at Schwab, and they tell me, well, I have a self-directed IRA at Schwab already. And I explained to them, well, Schwab is a broker dealer. You can only pick off a certain list of stocks, bonds, or mutual funds. Their self-directed means you're just picking the stock or bond. It doesn't mean you actually have the freedom to place that money into things outside of the stock market. So what we say here at Equity Trust is we are truly self-directed, where you legally can invest that money in a very wide range of things. It does not have to be limited to the stock market.
Okay, perfect. And then
Mhm.
people have different types of retirement accounts with companies. Maybe it's 401k,
Mhm.
maybe it's, there are a few other types of accounts that you can have. So what
Mhm.
can be turned into a self-directed
Mhm.
IRA with you? Is there a limit?
Great question. So, really, the only limits are contribution limits. So, let's go over the different ways of kind of moving money to a self directed IRA. So, the most common is I already have an existing retirement account. It could be an IRA, a 401k, a thrift savings plan, a pension. There's all different types. So, if you have money in an American retirement account already, then you don't have to worry about limits. Really, the only thing at that point you're looking at is that money already in a retirement account, is it mobile? Can I move the retirement account? Can I roll it over or transfer it to an IRA, here at Equity Trust? IRA to IRA movements are always possible. IRAs are individual retirement accounts, so there's no employer involved, which means the account holder who has the IRA, they're calling all the shots. So they can move that money from IRA to IRA as often as they would like. There's no restrictions. An employer plan like a 401k or a pension or a thrift savings plan, Because there's an employer in the mix, generally your employer determines whether or not those funds are mobile. So what I always tell people is if you're telling me you're rolling over, let's say a pension or a 401k, my first question to you is always going to be, okay, is this a pension or a 401k from your current employer or a previous employer? That's a big kind of fork in the road there. If it's a previous employer, the employer's out of the picture, it's always mobile. You can always roll it over to an IRA here. If it's your current employer, then you can sometimes get into issues where if it's a 401k or pension and you're still working that job, if you're retirement age, you might be able to roll some of the assets out. But if you're not retirement age, you're still working, you're still active, generally your employer can say, you can't move this 401k or this pension because we're making contributions, right? Your employer usually matches for you, and they want every employee's plan at the same location. So they
Mhm.
are able to restrict you if you are a current employee. For a previous employer, like I said, it's always mobile. It can always be rolled over here. So those are the two most common ways: moving, funds that you already have in a retirement account. IRAs, easy, always mobile. Employer plans, if it's from a previous employer, always mobile. Employer plans from your current employer, then you have to do a little bit of research and make sure.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm,
I created a plan like this so I can invest into real estate as well using my retirement funds, but it was actually after I had left my employer,
mhm,
then I gained control of it. I think when I was
mhm,
still employed there, I would not have been able to do that according to the plan
mhm.
rules.
Got it. Yes. And if you're your own employer, you obviously you're pretty partial to yourself, right? You're going to be pretty generous and say, well, if I'm my own employer, then yes, I will allow, the movement of these funds to an account that allows self-direction.
Okay. And then, maybe some of my investors have heard of the term
Mhm.
solo 401k. Could we just go over
Mhm.
sort of, what that is and what the difference is between that and a self-directed IRA?
Yeah, sure. So a self-directed IRA is not tied to an employer. So basically, that's the most common type. Most folks who are not self-employed, they're not currently working for an employer. Those are usually IRAs are usually the vehicles that receive those funds, right? So most people think of them as I used to work at a job. I had a 401k through my employer. When I left the job, my 401k was now mobile and I rolled it over to an IRA because the IRA is just me. It's not tied to an employer. Versus what you mentioned, a solo 401k. That's sometimes called an individual 401k or a one participant 401k. So a little different than a 401k most people think of when they're working at a large employer. A solo 401k is a 401k plan for someone who is self employed with no employees. You are allowed to have a partner or a spouse working in your business, but generally that is it. So solo 401ks are very simple 401ks because there's no testing. Basically, if you have a large 401k with many employees in it, that's again what most businesses have. They're very expensive. You have to do non-discrimination testing to make sure no one employee is getting special treatment. A solo 401k takes all that out of the mix because it's a 401k plan for someone who's self-employed with no employees. So all the benefits of a 401k, all the higher contribution limits, some of the protections from certain types of taxes, and the ability to put a lot of money away every year into that plan. So it's very popular with individuals who are self-employed with no employees. Not a lot of folks, unfortunately, fit that criteria. But if you are if one of your listeners is one of those lucky individuals, they should definitely sit down with their CPA and ask them about an individual or solo 401k because it will really help them supercharge their retirement savings by funneling a lot more money in there every year.
Okay.
Mhm,
All right. So safe to say that most of the people doing this amongst our
mhm,
investors at Serious Real Estate are probably going to go for the self-directed IRA option then.
mhm,
Okay. So let's talk just a little bit about the taxes and then maybe we can go
mhm.
into exactly how one would do this.
Sure.
But so you've said it a couple of times, but I just want to drive the point home. When people transfer their retirement funds from a previous retirement plan into
Mhm,
a self-directed IRA with
mhm.
Midland Trust, is it a taxable event? Are they going to suddenly owe the IRS a lot of taxes?
Great question. And that is usually the number one question I get from most individuals, besides what is a self directed IRA? To answer it, No, as long as you're moving the money from, let's say, pre-tax IRA or pre-tax 401k or retirement plan to another pre-tax IRA here. And again, all IRAs are the same. So a traditional IRA here, the rules, contribution limits are the exact same as a traditional IRA at a Schwab or Fidelity. So if you're just moving that money from an existing IRA to the IRA here, we actually do that via what's called an IRA to IRA trustee transfer. And that's just a fancy way of saying when you open up the IRA with me, you fill out one of my transfer forms and I pull that money over for you. So the account holder's out of the equation. So that IRA to IRA movement is not even reported to the government
Hmm.
because we're actually signing off on that transfer form saying we are the receiving custodian. Hey, Schwab, send us that money straight out of the traditional IRA that, the individual has with you. You're going to send it straight to the new traditional IRA here at Equity Trust. And again, that movement not even reported to the IRS. So you can do as many of those a year as you'd like. If it was a rollover, rollovers are a little different. Rollovers are where the account holder initiates it. So let's say it's coming from an old 401k or a pension. The account holder is actually contacting the 401k or pension and saying, I opened up a traditional IRA with Kelsey over at Equity Trust. I need you to push my 401k funds to the IRA at Equity. That is reported to the government. Basically, when your 401k issues a check or sends a wire to us, they're gonna do a form what's called 1099, saying the money has left our plan. On our side, when we receive that money, we're going to report to the government, here's a form 5498. So I hope I'm not boring you, but basically that's the tax terms that they use. And those two forms match up. So basically your 401k or your pension says 100,000 left the 401k. And then when we receive it, we say 100,000 has been received by your IRA. So those two filings match up with the government and the government can see the money left that location, but was deposited here. There's no tax implication. So that's a long way and a very detailed way of saying these retirement account movements are not taxable. So you can move money. You don't have to worry about having penalties or taxes. You're just basically moving money from one retirement account to another.
Okay, perfect. So basically, it is non-taxable, and once they once the funds are over, there's forms that basically make sure everything's matches up, so that this is a non-taxable event.
Correct.
Okay, so maybe what we can do is zoom out a little bit and just talk about, you know, mechanically in sort of a stepwise
Mhm.
fashion, say, we have someone who is transferring from a job uh, and they love real estate. They would love to
Mhm.
invest into a great syndication or pass a real estate
Mhm.
investment deal. They have, say, $500,000 at their previous employer. And
Mhm.
they see this video and they say, okay, I'd
Mhm.
like to do this. So, what are sort of the steps that they're going to follow to create this account with you?
Yeah. So the very first thing they would do is they would contact my team directly because we have a specific link for investors who are going to be doing something like a syndication or real estate fund. And you want to be set up with my institutional team because we're basically going to be guiding you through the process. The very first step is a application link. And it's about 10 minutes. You click on the link, it asks you all your personal details. So, name, social, who would be your beneficiary if you were to pass away, all the usual things you see when you set up an IRA account somewhere. So you would establish the IRA with us. Part of that application will say where the funds originating from. And there'll be a couple boxes you can check off. The very first one is I'm transferring from an existing IRA. The second one is I'm rolling over money from a non-IRA. So that's like a 401k, a pension, a thrift savings plan, et cetera. The last option is I'm making a contribution. And contributions are basically the government limits how much money every year you could take out of your personal pocket and put into an IRA. And that's a method of funding as well. So usually it will ask you, how are you putting money in this account? Where is it coming from? And you'll check off those boxes. Um, Later on in the application, it will say, what are we going to be investing these funds in? So if they're working, with you, Daniel, they'll list your name and the name of your fund or your syndication that they're interested in, and they'll tell us right there on the application, I'm investing, let's say, out of the 100,000 I'm moving over, I'm going to put 50,000 in this offering and then another 50 in a different offering. So they'll tell us right there on the application. Now, the nice thing is my whole relationship with managers and syndicators is to make this process as easy and seamless as possible. So usually I'll be working with you ahead of time to onboard various investment documents. So something like a private placement memorandum, subscription agreement, anything that the investor needs to sign to show that they're investing into the real estate offering. Um, Interesting to note, they have to do it through us because the IRA is the investor, not them personally. So that's why step one is always setting up the IRA first, because we need to establish an account number for them. Because once we do that, I can then help them pre-fill those subscription documents showing their IRA here is the investor with you. It's going to be in the IRA's tax ID number. It's going to be made using retirement accounts, right? The investment will be made using retirement account funds. So it really removes the individual from the entire process. It's not the individual's name, it's not their social security number, it's not money from their personal savings account, right? They're completely out of it. It's in the IRA's name, using the IRA's tax ID number, funded directly out of the IRA here using their retirement account cash that's in the IRA. So everything is handled by our group. It's all via DocuSign. Everything's pre-filled. Once they do that application, we'll assist them with moving money over to the new IRA here. That money arrives. We have those subscription documents pre-filled. They click the DocuSign and approve it. And at that point, they've authorized their IRA here to invest in the real estate offering. So it's all self-contained. It's basically a real nice, seamless process that we kind of pull them through.
Okay, so there were a few important points there,
Mm-hmm,
and you basically answered, how do you invest in something using this and making
mm-hmm,
sure that it is not your taxable money, but the money that is in the retirement. And you answered it because you're going to be using the EIN essentially of your self-directed IRA. So it's the IRA that is investing the retirement
mm-hmm.
funds itself, not you individually.
Correct.
So okay, that's fairly simple there. Can you talk a little bit
Mm-hmm,
about the timelines? So sometimes,
mm-hmm,
these windows to invest into these opportunities are fairly tight. I would
mm-hmm,
say on average, you're going to be looking at maybe a 4 to 6 week window from the time you
mm-hmm.
hear about something like this. So how long does this take? Can you talk us through the timelines?
Absolutely. So the shortest amount of time it will probably take is 5 business days. There's what we call a 7-day right of rescission. When you open up an IRA account, you legally have basically 7 days to rescind or revoke investments. So there's a 7-day right of rescission. And honestly, most transfers, when we're moving over money, because we're not a broker dealer, we're pulling over cash. So that's an important distinction. Some people think, oh, well, I've got stocks or bonds at Schwab. I'll just send the stocks or bonds to equity and you guys can liquidate them there. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. What happens is we set up the IRA and we're pulling over cash, or you're rolling over and pushing cash to us. So they'll want to essentially place a liquidation order for whatever they're looking to move over. So if that money's invested in stocks or bonds, they're going to liquidate out of whatever they're currently holding. Liquidation orders, usually once you place them, it's 2 to 3 business days max. It's usually very fast. And then we will pull the money over. So when we're dealing with places like Schwab is extremely quick. So we'll get a transfer form, we'll submit it to Schwab. They'll usually wire us funds within 2 to 3 business days. Once that money arrives, we can then basically clear the investment and have it funded by day 5. So 5 business days. Very, very fast on that side. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I've seen rollovers from pensions or 401ks. When you contact your pension or your 401k and you say, I've set up an IRA with Kelsey over at Equity Trust, I would like to roll over the funds there, and you're basically pushing them to us. A lot of 401ks and pensions, I don't know if it's to cut down on administrative fees, but they will not wire money. They
Mhm.
will say, we're going to cut a check, it'll be made payable to your IRA, but then we're going to physically mail that check to you personally for security reasons. And a lot of my clients, it's funny, they go, well, why can't they just send the check straight to my IRA so we can deposit it and, get moving? And again, I think it's just for security, whatever the reason is. Those take a little bit longer because number one, they're cutting a check. You got to wait for it in snail mail. They're usually sending it to your home address. And then once you get it, you have to forward it to us. So for things like that, that's probably going to take a month, I would say, just to be pessimistic. If you can contact your 401k or pension and ask them to FedEx checks or do something like that, that will help speed it up. But that's worst case scenario, really. I would say on average, if I had to give you just one general answer, I would say 2 weeks on average.
Okay, so we'll say 2 to 4 weeks is sort of the, the timeline because that actually happened to me. So when I
Oh,
created
really?
something
Okay.
like this, I was hoping that they would just wire funds, but no, they said they're gonna write a check. So I was so nervous because for about a week, I had this
Mhm.
enormous check just floating around the postal system. And then when it finally came to me, I was staring at this huge number on a check and I just had to forward it along. It was a little scary, but yeah,
Mhm.
it did work out, and it did take approximately 4 weeks for
Mhm.
everything because of that really big delay because of the you're relying on the postal system essentially.
Yep.
Okay. And then just as a extra detail, so it sounds
Mhm.
like you can still contribute retirement funds
Mhm.
actively once you establish this. Is that true? What are the details on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, an IRA here is identical to an IRA at any other institution. The self-directed piece, like I said, really just means that we give you more investment options. We don't restrict your investment options to a menu of stocks or bonds. So what that means is because every IRA is identical, it's all governed by the IRS. These are federal rules. Contribution limits are the same too. So if you're making contributions to your traditional IRA or your Roth IRA at Schwab, you are welcome to do the exact same thing in your traditional IRA or Roth IRA, here at Equity Trust. Contribution limits vary depending on the year. So every year they're usually adjusted for inflation a little bit. And they're universal. So traditional or Roth IRAs are the most common types. This year, I think we're up to $7,000 if you're under the age of 50, 8,000 if you're over. So if you are used to making contributions or your CPA or tax advisor recommends you keep on making those contributions, by all means, you are welcome to make them directly to the IRA here. It's an IRA just like any other IRA, same contribution rules.
But if they're, you can't double dip, right? So if they're still making contributions actively through
Mhm.
their employer, for example, to their
Mhm.
employer's fund, it's not like they
Mhm.
can double it, right? There's a hard limit to the amount any individual can invest into retirement funds in any given year, right?
Correct. Yes. So contribution limits are usually aggregate. So the government says, I don't care if you have 100 IRAs at 100 different locations, that limit of 7,000 if you're under the age of 50, 8,000 if you're over, that's combined between all of them. So yes, you're correct. You can't double dip. Those contribution limits are aggregate for your retirement accounts. And if you're actively contributing to an employer plan like a 401k or pension, then you definitely need to sit down and look at the IRS rules regarding, your income and how much you're contributing, because they will sometimes limit you on if you're actively contributing to a 401k, then there's only so much you can contribute to an IRA.
Okay, perfect. So good conversation to have with one's
Mhm.
CPA, I would say.
Definitely.
Okay. And then I think the last detail to kind of fully paint this picture is uh, once the funds are over with you, are they sitting in a
Mhm.
checking account? Is that where they go? And then you have to
Mhm.
actively direct where to invest them? How does that work?
Yeah. So when we set up the IRA, we set up essentially a FDIC insured bank account within the IRA. So when you're transferring over money or rolling over 401k funds, when they first arrive, that's where they're going. So it's going into essentially a cash account, FDIC insured, not invested. So again, as a self-directed IRA, we can't just arbitrarily take that money and say, "Hey, based on your profile and what you told us, we're just going to slap it in this investment." So it is cash until you direct it into a certain offering. Now, most individuals, when they're setting up the account with us, they already know what they're doing, right? They're usually working with someone like yourself, Daniel, and they're saying, Daniel, I'm going to roll over or move 100,000 from my Schwab IRA or 401k. I'm going to move it to Kelsey at Equity Trust. And then as soon as that money arrives, I want her to direct 50,000 into this particular real estate syndication project I'm interested with you. And then the other 50 I want in this project. So usually we have those details well ahead of time. The money is usually the last piece that we're waiting on. And then once that arrives, like I said, what we'll do is we'll pre-fill those subscription documents or whatever investment documents are involved with the name of the IRA, the dollar amount, and the client really at that point is just reviewing them via DocuSign, clicking to sign, and then if it's a large dollar amount, we require that they call in to give us a verbal authorization. So they'll call us and say, "Hey, Kelsey, go ahead and send out that wire for X number of dollars to Daniel for for the investment in the syndication project." That's usually determined well in advance.
Okay, great. And 2 points there I want to emphasize
Mhm.
is that it's not going to be invested automatically. So if you send over
Correct.
money, you have to direct it to be invested. Otherwise, it's just going to sit there and not earn anything. Okay. And then, secondly, it sounds like it's really important to make sure that when the sponsor of the real estate deal is
Mhm.
distributing money, it has to go back to that self-directed IRA checking account. It should not be going into your private sort of individual checking account, correct?
Yes, absolutely correct. So the way to think of it is when you have a roster of investors for a project, again, it's going to be the name of the IRA's tax ID number. So what that means is the IRA is the investor, not the individual. So that's a good thing, obviously, because then you get to use your retirement funds. It's tax sheltered, and it's self-contained. So, like you said, Daniel, any sort of income. So it could be dividends, it could be sale proceeds. Let's say the project matures and is sold and you're basically closing it down and distributing everyone's share of the sale proceeds. Same idea. So the IRA is the investor. The IRA, if there's a capital call, the IRA is submitting capital calls to
Hmm.
fund additional capital. If there's dividends or income generated on a yearly basis, those return straight to the IRA here. That's good for the individual because it doesn't touch their personal taxes. So it's not income that they have to worry about that they're paying taxes on. It's sheltered by the IRA, it's collected by the IRA, not exposed to any sort of personal taxes. And then eventually, when the project is sold, all the proceeds go back to the IRA here. So, yes, it is perfectly self contained. And the way I explain it to folks who are new to the self directed concept is think about a stock that you bought, in your IRA at Schwab. If it yielded dividends, those dividends went right back to your Schwab IRA. You didn't even see them, right? It had nothing to do with you personally. It's the exact same idea. In this case, your IRA here at Equity Trust is investing in maybe a real estate syndication instead of a stock. But it's the same treatment. Any dividends, any income that investment kicks off will return right back to your IRA here.
Perfect.
Mhm.
And I think just as a last point for my more active folks, you can use
Mhm.
something like this to buy individual property as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So let's say you want to be a little bit more active, so we have a large spectrum. We have people who are very busy professionals, high net worth individuals. They're looking for projects that are professionally managed, and put together. They basically just cut a check and then sit back and, passively invest. And then we have folks who are more active. They want to maybe do a passive investment, but then also if they find something, I've had people say in my neighborhood, there's a rental property right down the street that I would love to acquire, just because, I like my neighborhood, it's up and coming, or my city, or whatever it might be. Yes, they are more than welcome to buy something where they're more actively engaged in managing it. Important to note with IRAs, you can't do any sort of self dealing. So you can't acquire a rental property or something that you're going to actively manage from a prohibited party like yourself, a spouse, parent, grandparent, your children, grandchildren, etc. So you really need to be doing business with arm's length third parties. So your IRA could buy that property from a third party. The IRA would pay for any sort of renovations. The IRA would, rent out the property and collect rental income from a third party again. And you, as the account holder, can make all those decisions. It's self-directed, but you cannot personally benefit. So you can't pay yourself a management fee. You can't rent the property to, yourself or a child.
Hmm.
It needs to all be arm's length, truly business activities.
Okay, excellent. And then in that scenario, can the IRA take out a mortgage or do they just buy it? They have to buy it cash.
Great question. So there's a variety of ways to buy a property like that. So cash is definitely the most common just because cash is king. People, if they have the cash in their retirement account, it's a very simple transaction just to make a cash offer, buy it cash. Now, if they wish to stretch or leverage their funds, then yes, you can take out a mortgage. It is not a regular mortgage. It is what we call a non-recourse loan. What that is, it's more common with commercial properties and larger, like industrial properties, but the government requires any property that your IRA is buying to be non recourse if you finance it. And what that means is there's no personal guarantee by the IRA holder. So when I go to buy that property and I apply for a mortgage from the bank, usually in most cases the bank's going to say, okay, well, what assets do you personally have? You're going to basically sign that if you can't pay this mortgage, we can come after you personally. The IRS does not allow that. The IRS says the IRA is the borrower in this situation. The IRA basically cannot expose you personally to any sort of pass through like liability. You can't use any personal assets to pledge for collateral. So it's self contained. The IRA is the purchaser of the property. The IRA borrows the money. The IRA is the one offering collateral. It does
Hmm.
not come through to you personally. There are no personal guarantees. So what that means is non-recourse loans are a little bit harder to find because, again, the bank is taking a little bit more of a risk because you're personally not pledging anything. It's only secured by the property in your IRA. So usually the amount down is a little bit larger. It's usually 40 to 50% down, and you can finance the rest. Usually the interest rates might be a little bit higher than market averages. You just have to kind of do your research. We do keep lists of non-recourse lenders for people who want to do research and look into it. But yeah, so it's definitely possible. The IRA would be borrowing the money. The IRA makes a monthly mortgage payment, and usually that property has to cash flow because the IRA is not a person. There's no job they're working to pay that monthly mortgage. So the property the IRA buys has to be a rental property or something that cash flows. The IRA collects the rental income and then uses that rental income to pay the monthly mortgage.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay.
Mhm.
And, wrapping up here, I think one thing that some of my investors might have heard of is something called UBIT. UBIT.
Yes.
Can we
Mhm.
address that before we close?
Sure. So IRAs are tax shelters. So most folks think, I'll never have to pay any taxes associated with anything my IRA does. And to an extent, that's correct. However, when your IRA starts doing business activities, so I'll give you a great example. Let's say they invest in a passive real estate property, they're just renting it out, right? That rental income, that's passive. They're not actively running a business. The government and the IRS view, long-term rentals as passive. If they were operating a car wash, they bought a car wash or a self-storage, company, they're then starting to run a business out of their IRA. The government basically says to keep things on level footing with other businesses that are, normal businesses outside of retirement accounts and subject to taxes. We are basically going to force IRA accounts who are operating businesses within their IRA. They're forced to pay UBIT, which is unrelated business income tax. And there's two pieces actually of that tax. There's the business activity, and then there's debt financing, which is called UDFI, unrelated debt financed income. Um, in a nutshell, don't want to get too granular, but basically, if your IRA is doing passive investments, not running a business, not borrowing money, then it is 100% tax sheltered. You don't have to worry about that. With the non recourse loan that we just discussed, you're financing, you're basically bringing in outside IRA money, right? So when you buy the property, you put half down. The half down is coming cash out of your IRA. That's tax sheltered. The half that you're financing is not IRA money. You're bringing it, you're borrowing it from an outside source. So that 50% of the project is then subject
Hmm.
to the UDFI, the unrelated debt financed income tax. Now, as your IRA makes those monthly mortgage payments and pays down that debt, basically it's reducing the exposure. So over time, you're basically slowly dwindling down that exposure and paying less and less. UBIT has $1,000 exemption where on an annual basis, if your UBIT tax is less than 1,000, you don't have to pay it anyway. So usually it's not a big part of the deal. Let's put it this way. I've never seen it kill a deal where the numbers make sense. At that point, they go, it's still a great investment. It's still a great rate of return. I'm just paying a little bit in taxes to the government. And usually, like I said, over time, as you pay down debt or as business activity fluctuates, maybe you decide to stop doing short-term rentals where you're conducting like a short-term Airbnb that could be considered business activity, and you're doing longer term, then obviously you're not exposed to that anymore. Just talk to a CPA or tax advisor
Yeah.
if you are planning to be very aggressive and take out a lot of leverage and do a lot of active business activities versus passive. That's what it boils down to.
I think that's a great point. We are not
Mhm.
tax professionals. Take everything that you hear with a grain of salt because, it's important to talk to your CPA about all
Mhm.
of this. In your average syndication, there is going to be leverage used
Mhm.
by the sponsor. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that
Mhm.
most syndication deals with an investment from a self-directed IRA would be subject
Mhm.
to UBIT tax.
Y- Yes. Well, it's interesting because with UBIT tax, you've borrowed money in the syndication deal, but also you usually have quite a few write-offs, especially if you're doing things like accelerated depreciation, et cetera. So usually what happens is the syndication, the manager, their accounting team sit down and they go over the numbers. They go, okay, how much did we leverage versus what are our deductions? We're writing off the interest that we're paying. If we have depreciation, we're writing off that. So basically, they have the task of figuring out that math. And then usually you'll issue a K1 to the investor, right? And for anybody who's invested in a syndication, that K1, you get it on an annual basis. There's a spot where you can actually indicate UBIT on that K1. And that is usually a summation of, how much do we leverage, how much do we make in income versus how much do we depreciate, how much do we pay in, interest and other deductions, and you get to that number on the K1. And that K1 is specific to that individual investor. So the IRAs here will get a K1, right? And on the K1, it will say the name of the IRA's tax ID number, and if any UBIT is applicable.
Yeah.
So you guys kind of do all that math. You figure out sometimes it might not even apply depending on the numbers. If it does apply on the K1, it's listed. The investor, the IRA here, gets that K1. And like I said, the first $1,000 exempt. You don't have to worry about it. You don't even have to file. Talk to a CPA. I'm not a CPA or tax advisor, but that's what I've been told, and that's what I've seen others do. If it is over 1,000, then what happens is you have to have a 990T filed. That 990T is basically a form that lists the IRAs paying the tax bill. And then the payment for the tax bill actually comes out of the IRA account because, again, the IRA is the investor. So the IRA needs to pay that tax bill.
Okay. No, that's a great point that
Mhm,
in the syndications, so much of it is going to be tax sheltered due to the depreciation
mhm,
and accelerated depreciation and bonus.
mhm.
So yeah, there might be none actually, even though it's
Correct.
subject to it. Perfect.
Mhm,
Well, I think we've talked really, really in a lot of detail about this. Hopefully,
mhm,
some of my investors are still watching, but I wanted to thank you,
mhm,
Kelsey, for your time today and really talking about this exciting way to access retirement accounts and invest them more actively and with
mhm.
more autonomy. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to some more investors contacting you.
Yeah, my pleasure, Daniel. Anyone is welcome to use me as a resource. Again, happy to go over their specifics, where they have retirement accounts, if they're mobile, what the process is. I am a CISP. So my designation is a certified IRA services professional. So basically, I've been in the industry long enough to be certified to talk about the IRA rules, how they work. So yeah, happy to serve as a resource for you and any investors that want to tap those retirement accounts to invest.
All right. Thanks so much. Talk again soon.
All right, take care.